want to call to order the meeting of the Full Budget Committee, May 27th, 2015. I want to thank everyone who is who's here today for attending the meeting of the Full Budget Committee. We don't meet that often, but most folks know that we meet often in terms of the individual subcommittees. I want to begin the meeting today, first of all, not only by welcoming you here to this very, very important meeting that we have every year, but also by thanking the various committee members who have been participating in this very extensive process since the beginning of the year. Today's culminates is the 70th hearing of the 2015 process. Many of you have spent many hours attending the meetings as members of the larger community, but many of our members, budget committee members, have also attended extensive meetings. I want to specifically thank the chairs of the budget, Mr. Thurman, McCarty, Bloom, Nazarian, and Joan Sawyer, for their work in crafting this budget. And what we have before us is the work of not only the chairs but the sub-chairs of those committees and the members of the committees process that's there. This budget today this budget proposal that we have before us today, as I said, is a culmination of 70 meetings and several months of hearings and discussions, not only among the members but among the public and many of the advocates who have come and made important contributions to this discussion. This is an important budget because it basically does a couple of things that we think in the Assembly are important. We set out at the beginning of the year in our caucus particularly to identify what we thought were some key issues and important issues that needed to be addressed at the state level. And this budget responds to those issues. One, we talked about building a reserve or ensuring stability in the state. Hopefully not making us as vulnerable as we have been in the past to the rise and falls of the economic environment. And for that reason, this budget builds a reserve to $5.3 billion. The Assembly version of the budget contains a $5.3 billion reserve. And with the passage of Prop 2, this creates the largest reserve the state has had in decades, representing almost 5% of the total expenditures. Two, it talks about we set as a priority to reinvest in schools and early education. This version of the budget increases Prop 98 funding for 2015-16 by $8.2 billion more than was provided in the 2014-15 budget. The Assembly version also of the budget provides $600 million in early education and child development investments above what was proposed in the governor's May revision. Three, it increases CSU and UC and financial aid funding. The Assembly version of the budget fully funds a CSU request for a total of $97 million over the January proposed budget to expand enrollment and reduce time to graduation. The Assembly version of the budget provides a $35 million increase to the University of California, but makes the funds contingent upon the UC increased enrollment of California residents by 8,000 over the next 2 years and capping the enrollment of out-of-state students. The Assembly version also increases Cal Grant B stipends to 2,000, more than doubles the number of competitive Cal Grant awards from 22,000 to 50,000, and accelerates the middle class scholarship to reduce CSU and UC fees by as much as 30%. The fourth thing this budget does in terms of our priorities, it begins to process and continuing to reducing poverty. The Assembly version of the budget established a state-earned income tax credit that will benefit over 2 million Californians and lift approximately 50,000 out of poverty and another 50,000 out of deep poverty. The Assembly version of the budget begins an effort to increase the state minimum wage to the supplemental poverty level to ensure that a family with a full-time worker will not live in poverty. The Assembly version also provides the elimination of the maximum family grant rule, the ill-conceived rule that harmed families and their chances of returning to work and getting out of poverty. The fifth thing this budget does is begins to fight the climate change. The Assembly version of the budget builds upon the governor's cap-and-trade plan by adding $180 million in additional investment in programs that facilitate California meeting our 2013 greenhouse gas goals. So we are very proud of the fact that we've set out a number of priorities, and we're beginning to deal with those priorities, staying focused on a number of clearly addressing a lot of issues, but making sure that we address those issues directly and begin the process in California to once again assure stability, invest in our schools and higher ed, increase our CSU funding and financial, work on early education, begin the process of reducing poverty, and begin the process of dealing with climate change in California. As a result of that, I welcome you to the meeting of the Full Budget Committee for 2015. I would like to at this time obviously give to the Vice Chair an opportunity to also make opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for being here, everyone. I will say on the outset that I am thankful that we find ourselves in a better economic circumstance than we did 5 or so years ago. But as has been repeated many times in this room, the state is highly dependent on volatile personal income tax revenue, and we seem to be enjoying a period of economic and revenue growth. I am thankful that the governor and our 2 caucuses have developed a rainy day fund for smoothing out future budgets, which the voters passed last year. However, the rainy day fund is still in its infancy, and there is not enough to cover state tax revenue losses from even a moderate recession. The Assembly budget adopts more optimistic revenue projections despite Standard & Poor's recent announcement that the governor's May revision avoids a disproportionate reliance on a windfall-like revenue from capital gains to fund ongoing commitments. There is much to praise in both the governor's and the Assembly budgets, such as the commitment to primary classroom education funding, but we do have concerns that the Assembly budget has expanded many programs that will result in ongoing spending commitments that we may not be prepared to deal with in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Additionally, I also want to voice the reminder that money by itself is not going to make our schools better. I am happy that the schools are getting their fair share of funding. Assembly Republicans believe that with the extra funding, though, comes the responsibility to take steps to improve our schools. And I would be happy to share our bills, many of them currently on interim study, for possible inclusion in budget trailer bills. For these reasons, I will be recommending a no vote on the current Assembly proposal, but I do look forward to the conference process, and I think between Chairman Weber and myself and the rest of the members of the committee, we're going to work our hardest to come to some sort of consensus and agreement that benefits everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Today, each one of the subcommittees will present a brief report from their seats here covering the highlights of the work that has taken place in their subcommittees. After that, we will take member questions and comments, so we'll make sure that we get through every report first, because if we stop with questions in between, we may never finish. So we'll make sure we do all of the reports first. I'm asking the chairs to be brief, because most of us have sat through the hearings. If not sat through them, we've gotten the reports and the results, and we've seen the documents. But we want to give each one of our sub-chairs an opportunity to highlight what has happened very briefly in their committee and the main items that they believe they've addressed, and any ongoing challenges that remain. After that, we will take questions from our members, any questions and comments, and the Department of Finance and the LAO will be here also to help out and answer any questions if we want to ask questions of them. Finally, we will take one vote on the entire package. And there's no public comments today in terms of the budget. Most of you have had an opportunity to comment in the subcommittees, and generally at this meeting, there is no public comments that are given at the meeting. With that having been said, we'll begin in order with our first sub 1, and we ask them to be brief and share with us the highlights of sub 1. Mr. Thurman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership on the budget process and the subcommittee process. And thank you. Yes, I will miss our hearings, 2 5-hour hearings a week. I will truly miss it. Oh, wrong text. I am actually honored that we've had the opportunity to have those hearings because, as has been stated by many, it was just a few short years ago that we've seen some of the deepest cuts to programs that serve the most frail and fragile and most in need in California in the areas of health and human services. And as a social worker for over 20 years, I came here with a desire to be able to help offer something to restore what we can for those who are the least of us among us who have the greatest need. So it is an honor, Dr. Weber, to work with you and your leadership and your team and the budget staff and the members of the Sub 1 committee. I want to thank them for their work and, of course, our staff working with us. It's great that we can do some. There's so much more that we wish we could do, but we're glad that we could do some. Certainly in the area of Medi-Cal, we've heard throughout the year, we've had 20 hearings this year, and we've heard repeatedly the impacts that cuts to Medi-Cal have had. In my own community, we've had a hospital that's the only hospital in emergency room for 5 cities closed, in large part because of low Medi-Cal reimbursement rates. Having said that, we're glad that the Sub 1 committee and the budget process was able to provide a way to restore the 10% cuts to Medi-Cal in a phased approach, 5% one year and 5% the next year. That we could also restore some optional Medi-Cal benefits like acupuncture and podiatry and others that you'll hear about throughout the course of our conversation. That we could provide funding for a dental disease program. We spent a tremendous amount of time talking about the impact that dental illness and not having access to care has on many, including our children. The subcommittee early on took action to approve implementation of overtime as it relates to the IHSS program. The subcommittee approved the Governor's May revision program of the Earned Income Tax Credit and further added a COLA for those who receive SSI and SSP. We continued our work to support the safety network for young people in foster care, particularly young adults who transition out of foster care, young adults who are homeless and don't fit into any systems of support, and then resources to support homeless families. As Dr. Weber has stated, the subcommittee approved the Senate's version of the repeal of the maximum family grant. For us, the theme has been, how do we lift families out of poverty? And we were honored to sign on in support of that work. We were also honored to be able to approve a proposal to support CalWORK's support for homeless families. Moving further, we've approved the governor's May revision proposals to support DAPA and DACA applications, but our subcommittee went a step further and added $15 million to support direct naturalization and outreach for the 2 million some Californians who are eligible to avail themselves of those benefits. And so we've been able to take that further and to look at how we work with seniors and folks who are in institutions that require oversight from programs like our long-term care ombudsman and to restore some money into that program. We were able to take action on the governor's proposal to close the developmental centers. We know that while this is a tough issue and an emotional issue, there are consumers who have been living in really institutions for years. And we believe that everyone deserves to enjoy a great quality of life, to live in the community as they see fit with the right supports. And our subcommittee was able to approve a timeline for closure, but also the subcommittee added one component to create a stakeholder group to ensure that every single consumer, his or her family, would have a chance to give voice to how that closure would take place, that public employee groups that are impacted would have a place to raise concerns about how we ensure that those who serve our consumers in the DCs can serve our consumers with a job in the community. We were able to restore some dollars for the Early Start program, which supports our youngest children who have developmental disabilities for assessment and intervention, and very excited that we could support the rate restoration for those agencies that serve people with developmental disabilities, both regional center operations and purchase of service, the organizations in the community that provide the direct service to folks with developmental disabilities. Over time, a total rate increase of 10%, 5% in January, and then another 5% next July. It's been an honor to do that work and an honor to partner with Chairman McCarty and his members in Sub 2 to talk about early childhood education and child care, and we look forward to supporting their programs. Thanks again to the chair, to the members of our committee, to the staff for all of our great work together on behalf of those served in health and human services.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. At this time, we'll hear from Mr. McCarty, Sub 2.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. We're going to do roll call right now. We do have a quorum, so we want to take roll. Please.
Weber.
Here.
Melendez. Here. Allen. Bigelow.
Present.
Bonta.
Here.
Chavez. Chu. Cooley.
Here.
Cooper. Gordon.
Here.
Grove. Jones.
Here.
Jones Sawyer.
Here.
Kim. Lackey. McCarty. Mullen. Nazarian. Obernolte. O'Donnell. Patterson. Rodriguez. Stone. Thurman.
Here.
Ting. Wilk. Williams.
Just a quick question. Yeah, of the chair.
A quorum is present.
You have a question of the chair?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, and maybe you said this in the opening and I missed it. Can you clarify for the members on the dais, are you going to take questions after all the subcommittee
Yes,
chairs?
after all the subs make their brief reports, we will then, yes, take questions.
Okay, great, thank you.
Emphasize brief.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McCarty.
Brief. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership as the Budget Committee Chair. Certainly is my pleasure to chair Budget Sub 2, along with, I want to thank our committee members, Assembly members Kim, Chavez, Ting, and O'Donnell for their help and participation in over 50 hours of subcommittee work throughout the year. And certainly we're proud of the package we have today, helping us reinvest in our P through 16 education system, focusing on early education, K-12, and higher ed. For the K-12 Prop 98 piece, we're certainly pleased we're able to provide over $6 billion to the local control funding formula, roughly $159 million more than the May revise. Through one-time monies, this budget is able to provide a little over $5 billion in mandates and deferral payments to school districts, about $137 more than the May revision. For adult education, we approved as budgeted the governor's $400 million to focus on career tech issues. We did focus this on giving it out on an ADA basis. This issue will be going to conference committee, however, with some issues, changes with the House's. In the adult education piece, we also approved the $500 million provided in the governor's budget, made a few minor changes. This will be going to conference committee as well. There's been some discussions whether or not we should revisit the issue of the programs the districts were able to provide, focusing specifically on senior programs, and that will be hopefully a conversation talking point in the conference committee process. As far as teacher support and professional development programs, we were able to provide $190 million to help restore some of these programs cut during the recession, like BITSA and the PAR program, helping teachers along the way. For after-school programs, we were able to expand the state after-school program, the ACES effort, by $50 million, the first time that's received an increase in the program's history. For community colleges, via the Prop 98 budget, we were able to provide about $1.5 billion for the system, which is a significant increase. That's half ongoing, half one time, allowing the system to fund enrollment growth at 3%, able to launch new programs, provide financial aid for community college students, increase efforts to reform remedial education through the governor's basic skills proposal, and increasing other funding sources for student support efforts. For the Cal State system, as the chair noted earlier, we were able to approve the CSU Board of Governors request for fully funding the $97 million to allow them to fully fund enrollment growth, which allow us to serve 10,000 new students throughout the CSU system and expand graduation improvement efforts. For the University of California, we spent a lot of time focusing on the current budget, but also looking at ways how we could reform the UC system going forward. This just to note, is not a done deal right here. We're going to be working throughout the year to focusing how we could make efficiencies in the UC budget to better serve students, families, and taxpayers of California. But as far as the budget we have here today, as the chair noted, we have $35 million above the governor's proposal for the UC, but it comes with conditions. And the conditions include no fee increases, asking them to focus on a specific enrollment growth number, no growth in non-resident students after this budget year, and an issue that came up during our subcommittee process, making sure that UC uses non-resident fees to support resident enrollment growth in California. And again, these monies from the state of California will not be provided to the UC unless all of these conditions and requirements are met. As far as financial aid, one of the top issues here is focusing on increasing the number of competitive Cal grants, which hasn't been increased for 15 years. We're going to nearly double that amount from $22,000 to $50,000, helping more low-income students apply and go on to college. Teacher loan forgiveness is an issue that has been forgotten in the Great Recession, so we're going to restart the Apple program, providing loan forgiveness for new teachers entering the teaching profession. As Chairman Thurman noted, we spent a lot of time and effort focusing on early care and preschool and child care, noting that during the Great Recession, $1 billion and 100,000 slots were cut from this system. We're fortunate to provide $600 million in a comprehensive package and a meaningful step towards fully restoring funding for child care and preschool. Of note here, this package provides no changes how they're currently funded in Prop 98. Child care will still be funded in non-98, and the state preschool program will be funded in Prop 98. Some of the highlights of this package include expanding the state preschool program with full-day, full-year slots with wraparound care by 10,500 slots. We provide increases, a 20% increase to the state reimbursement rate for center-based care, and also rate increases for family-based care. Along with this, we're able to provide 10,000 additional slots through the alternative payment voucher program for child care. In sum, these actions taken by Sub 2 reflect our Assembly priorities to reinvest in our public schools, early education, and expand higher education options. In total, $16 billion in new money, ongoing and one-time money will be allocated through our P through 16 education system, hoping these investments help move California forward, and certainly appreciative again of the participation from our committee members on Sub 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarty. Sub 3's chair, Mr. Bloom, is not present. Therefore, I will submit to you his report. On behalf of Mr. Bloom, I want to thank Mr. Gordon, Mr. Obernolte, Mr. Patterson, and Mr. Williams, who are members of the subcommittee. It was a busy year in Sub 3 with the March, with the $1.9 billion drought package that was passed in March, getting the committee off to an early start. But this was just the start of the water discussions. The package today contains an additional $2.2 billion in drought funding. They also adopted some placeholder language on drought that would allow the discussion with the administration to move forward. The subcommittee had a very good discussion on this issue, and it is clearly going to be a big part of the Budget Conference Committee discussion in terms of the drought and the language there. He's also adopted a cap-and-trade plan that built upon the governor's May revision proposal, but added $180 million in additional investments in areas like biomass, biosolids, dairy digesters, biodiesel refining, active transit, and transit passes. They expect that it will also be a big part of the forthcoming conference discussion with the Senate and the areas that we differ. Finally, the subcommittee continued its important oversight of the Public Utilities Committee. On behalf of Mr. Bloom, he thanks the members of his committee and those of you who attended the hearings for making his work as the sub-chair a lot easier. At this time, we'll hear from Sub 4, Mr. Nazarian.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and it's been a pleasure working with you, as well as it's been a wonderful pleasure working with my committee members, including Mr. Cooper, Mullen, Wilk, and Allen. It was also wonderful to have you sit in instead of one of our colleagues who was absent for the day last week. I think that was the swiftest meeting we had with all the motions you were putting forward. So thank you for that. Want to just highlight, Sub 4 is the catch-all subcommittee that deals with all the smaller agencies and smaller budgets. So I'll just highlight, even though I have a highlight of 3 pages, I'll just pick a handful, and go through some of the items that we've worked on. California Arts Council, given the stagnant $1 million investment in the arts since 2001, glad to hear that with the movement that we've been making over the course of the last 2 years, this year's the governor's budget reflected our priority and increased it to $5 million on an ongoing basis. Redevelopment Agency, we had several meetings on. We had various hearings with city representatives coming before us. At this time, we've adopted the placeholder trailer bill language to continue the discussions. On the housing and community development front, we invested $20 million, including in the County Self-Help, Office of Migrant Services, Joe Cerna, as well as the Napa County Farm Worker Housing Programs. With the Department of Insurance, we invested $3 million on an ongoing basis for 5 years for their Brace and Bolt program. Franchise Tax Board, as an initiative of Sub 4, we started the $12 million annual allocation for establishing a 5-year program for seismic retrofit, helping with 30% of cost deferral through a tax credit. And through the Department of Industrial Relations, we provided $1 million for the paid sick leave outreach and education program. EDD, Employment Development Department, invested $48 million to continue to support unemployment insurance program services, and increased by $1 million the state's paid family leave program. Last but not least, we worked with the LAO's office and included budget bill language requiring the Department of Justice to consult with the BOE and Department of Finance to develop and report on the proposal for a statutory change related to reducing program costs and streamlining the tobacco licensing program. And last but not least, Department of Veterans, we continued with a $3 million investment with the CVSO programs, the County Veteran Service Officers Program. And it's been a very robust and active year. And again, it's been wonderful working with my colleagues, and I look forward to continue ongoing conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarian. That brings us to our 5th committee, which is Mr. Jones Sawyer.
And I also, too, want to thank my fellow committee members, Bigelow, Lackey, Rodriguez, and Campos, for being on Public Safety Sub 5. We're adding $33 million in the judicial branch to the Dependency Counsel Program with the intent of reducing attorney-client ratios for foster children and their parents. Right now, they have horrendous client lists. It's impossible for them to be able to handle the workload right now, and we need to help them, especially our most vulnerable, our foster children. There's a one-time increase of $1.3 million to support the state's collaborative courts. As many of you know, those are the drug courts, homeless courts, juvenile courts, and most important, our veterans courts. Is for local entities to draw down on those monies so to be able to better help those who are most needed. The thing that I'm most happy about is the governor's proposal for 18-month amnesty, mainly because it sets the stage for the courts to go after about $10.6 billion in uncollected revenue. If this program has any success whatsoever, trying to attain about $150 million, what would it be like if we only got 10% of that $10.6 billion? We probably could help close the gap of the reductions that they've taken over several years. And so we will continue to work not only with the governor's office, but also look at other ways to get those unclaimed resources. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the other good news is the numbers have reduced. We're about 40,000 beds reduction, which means there's a reduction of about $73.3 million to the CDCR. Again, this is very encouraging. Not only are we reducing the number of beds, but we have probably got an opportunity, hopefully in the future, at bringing the out-of-state beds back into California. We have people as far as Mississippi and Texas who are housing prisoners. We need to bring them back home once we get our numbers down. We need to do it cautiously. And, you know, one day we may be able to even close a prison, which has been unprecedented and never been done before. And I believe there's some talk about that. In addition, And the Recidivism Reduction Fund, we're continuing to fund the community-based organizations to the tune of $3 million. They're currently working on innovative programming outside of prisons. There's another $1.5 million in support of workforce investment boards. They're the ones that actually find jobs for the formerly incarcerated, and they've been doing a phenomenal job at that. As we all know, once you get out of prison, if you're not able to work, you're not able to find housing, you're not able to get reacclimated to society, you go back to what got you in prison in the first place. The WIB board are an excellent tool in ensuring that they get some type of employment. In the Office of Emergency Services, we're increasing the CalGRIP, the California Gang Reduction and Intervention Program, by $5 million to take it to $14.2 million. CalGRIP, as many of you know, provides state funds to cities using a local collaborative approach for gang intervention and suppression. Also, for the first time, we're also providing $10 million to support grants for community groups providing service to human trafficking victims. As many of us have been working on our committee, one of the biggest problem that we right now have is human trafficking is taking us over like a tsunami. We need to provide not only resources, but we have to provide resources in a unique way. This is not the typical type of crime that we've dealt with in the past, and so we have to handle this in a different way. Community groups are doing some innovative things to ensure that. In addition, with the California Highway Patrol, there have been a lot of discussion about body cameras. And one of the things that this body, the Assembly, needed to do was make sure that our own group, the California Highway Patrol, which is basically our police force, that they become at the forefront of using body cameras. We've got agreement with Commissioner Farrell to do a pilot program to look at small, medium, large, urban, and rural areas, $2 million to do a pilot program for body cameras, with the hopes that next year we'll fully fund it with specific policies and procedures that we know will work statewide. And then finally, there's about $5 million to support the implementation and enhancement of body cameras throughout the state, where, again, we're imposing a lot of body camera regulations on the locals. Those locals who actually, local communities who actually want to go out and do it on their own, I think we have a duty to provide them some type of funding so they can at least get it off the ground, maybe even do their own pilot programs. And so we're starting with $5 million to help with that effort. And I thank you.